The gunshot echoed through the operations center, followed by the metallic ping of the bullet striking 3 feet left of the target. Commander Blake Rourke slammed his fist on the table as another SEAL sniper lowered his rifle, sweat dripping down his face despite the Afghan mountain chill. 15 of the Navy's finest had tried. 15 had failed. The hostages had maybe 40 minutes before the sun angle made the shot impossible, and the Taliban executed them all. Rourke's voice cut through the tension like broken glass. Anyone else think they can make this shot? In the back corner of the cramped plywood operations center, a woman in a faded green flight suit stood up. The room went completely silent. Captain Maya Chun had been sitting quietly for the past 2 hours, watching the parade of SEAL snipers attempt the impossible. 2,800 yards across a valley to a compound where 3 American contractors and their Afghan translator waited for death. Each sniper had been confident. Each had missed. The math was brutal. Wind gusting between 8 and 15 miles per hour. Temperature dropping as the sun moved. Elevation of nearly 400 feet. The kind of shot that existed more in legend than reality. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison turned from his position near the targeting display, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury. His eyes locked on Maya with immediate dismissal. "You've got to be kidding me. A pilot? Commander, with all due respect, we don't have time for this." Rourke held up one hand, his weathered face carved with deep lines of stress. His gray eyes studied Maya with the intensity of a man who had run out of options and knew it. "Captain Chun, you have shooting experience?" Maya stepped forward, her movements economical and unhurried despite the weight of every stare in the room. She was small, barely 5'4", her black hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Everything about her suggested someone who preferred to go unnoticed. "Yes, sir. I shoot." Morrison let out a harsh laugh that held no humor. "She shoots. Perfect. Commander, half my team is staged for hostage extraction. We have 37 minutes before those contractors die. I'm not gambling American lives on whether some Air Force pilot can hit a target at the local range." Maya's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her dark eyes. Something that made Chief Petty Officer Luis Ramirez, Morrison's second-in-command, lean forward slightly in interest. She didn't rise to Morrison's bait, didn't defend herself, just waited. Rourke moved to the topographical map spread across the central table. The target compound sat in a valley surrounded by rocky ridgeline. The shooting position they'd identified was on the eastern ridge, nearly 3,000 yards from the compound's western wall where the hostages were being held. "Chun, 15 SEAL snipers have attempted this shot. What makes you think you can do better?" Maya approached the table, her eyes scanning the terrain features with a focus that suggested more than casual familiarity. She pointed to the wind direction indicator, then traced an invisible line from shooting position to target. "The mirage at that distance will be severe. Your snipers were fighting it instead of reading it." She paused, her finger resting on the elevation numbers. "And they're calculating for standard atmospheric conditions. We're at 7,200 feet here. Target Valley is at 6,800. That's not a 400-foot drop. It's a 400-foot rise in air density." The room had gone quiet again, but this time the quality of the silence had changed. Several of the SEALs exchanged glances. Morrison's face had shifted from dismissive to something harder to read. "Before we see whether she can back up this confidence, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar acts of quiet courage where you're from." Rourke's voice was measured, careful. "Where did you learn to shoot, Captain?" "My father taught me." Maya's answer was simple, offering nothing more. Morrison crossed his arms over his chest, his broad shoulders seeming to fill the small space. "Your father. Great. Commander, I'm putting my objection on record. We need a proven shooter, not someone's kid who learned to plink hands in their backyard." Maya turned to face Morrison directly for the first time. Her voice remained calm, almost soft, but something in her bearing had shifted. She stood a little straighter. "Lieutenant Commander, I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm offering to prove it. Give me 3 shots at your range. If I can't group them at 2,000 yards, you lose 5 minutes. If I can, you might save our lives. Ramirez spoke up, his voice cutting through Morrison's building protest. Jake, we're out of options. 5 minutes won't matter if we can't make the shot anyway. Morrison's jaw worked, his eyes never leaving Maya's face. He was searching for something. Doubt, maybe. Fear. But Maya's expression remained steady, patient. Finally, Morrison turned to Rourke. 3 shots. She misses, she's out, and we go with Kowalski's last attempt data to make best guess. Rourke nodded slowly. Captain Shun, you have your 3 shots. But understand what's at stake here. 3 American civilians and 1 local national who risked his life to help us. If you miss on the actual shot, they die. Can you handle that pressure? Maya's response came without hesitation, but also without bravado. I understand the stakes, sir. I've been carrying stakes like that every time I fly close air support over your teams. The difference is, from the cockpit, I'm usually moving at 300 knots. This shot is standing still. Morrison grabbed his rifle case with barely controlled aggression. Range. Now, let's see what the quiet pilot can actually do. The group moved toward the door in a shuffle of boots and equipment. Maya reached for her flight jacket, draped over a chair, but Chief Ramirez appeared at her elbow, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Ma'am, I don't know what your story is, but Morrison isn't usually this hostile without reason. He lost friends to bad air support on his last deployment. Nothing personal. Maya met his eyes briefly. Everything's personal, Chief. That's why we're all here. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the Hindu Kush mountains in shades of amber and shadow. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees. Maya felt the wind on her face, cataloging its speed and direction with unconscious precision. The small arms range sat behind a blast wall on the eastern edge of Forward Operating Base Chapman, crude but functional. Several off-duty soldiers had already gathered, words spreading fast that something unusual was happening. Morrison slammed his rifle case onto the shooting bench with deliberate force. The range only goes to 1,000 yards, Chun. We'll start there and see if you can even hit paper. Maya nodded, walking to the weapons rack maintained by the armory staff. She selected a rifle carefully, checking the scope mounting, working the bolt with practiced efficiency. The familiarity of the weapon seemed to settle something in her shoulders. She requested specific adjustments from the armorer, small details about eye relief and cheek weld that made the man raise his eyebrows, but comply. Morrison stood with his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. Ramirez and 4 other SEALs had followed them to the range. 2 Air Force pilots from Maya's squadron had materialized as well, looking confused but supportive. Maya settled into position behind the rifle, her body language transforming. The quiet, unassuming pilot disappeared, replaced by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She made minute adjustments to the rifle, checked the scope settings, and then went completely still. The first shot broke clean. Downrange, the spotter called out. Center mass. Dead on at 1,000. Morrison's expression didn't change. Lucky shot. Again, Maya worked the bolt smoothly, chambering another round. She settled back into position, controlled her breathing, and fired again. The report echoed off the mountains. Center mass, the spotter called again. Same hole as the first. Someone in the gathering crowd whistled low. Morrison's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Around them, more people were arriving. The word had spread. Something was happening at the range. Maya stood, ejected the remaining rounds, and turned to Morrison. I'll need 1,500 yards for the next shot, and I'll need to call my impact point before I shoot. She paused, meeting his hostile stare with calm certainty. Unless you'd rather I just keep proving it at 1,000 until you're ready to believe this isn't luck. Morrison stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to the range officer. Set up the 1,500-yard target. The crowd around them had grown larger. At least 20 soldiers now lined the observation area, drawn by rumors that something extraordinary was happening. Maya ignored them all, her focus narrowing to the mechanics of the shot ahead. The range officer called out ready. Maya settled back into position, her breathing already falling into the rhythm she'd learned so many years ago. She could feel Morrison's eyes on her, waiting for her to fail, wanting her to fail. The hostility rolled off him in waves, but she'd spent 8 years learning to tune out everything except the shot. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the range. Impact will be 4 inches right of center, 6 inches high, compensating for the wind shift from the west. Then she went silent, her world reducing to crosshairs and trigger press and the subtle dance between breath and stillness. The shot broke. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the spotter's voice came over the radio, edged with disbelief. 4 inches right of center, 6 inches high. Exactly as called. The murmur that went through the crowd was audible. Morrison's face had gone carefully blank, but Maya saw his hands clench briefly at his sides. Chief Ramirez stepped closer to the spotting scope, verifying the call himself. His weathered face showed the first hint of genuine respect. Maya stood, worked the bolt, and turned to Morrison. 2,000 yards. I'll need the wind flag set at 500-yard intervals so I can read the mirage properly. And I'll call this shot too. Morrison's voice came out tight. Who trained you? My father. Maya's answer remained simple, but this time Morrison didn't let it go. Your father have a name, Captain? Or did he teach you to shoot in between deployments to whatever cushy Air Force base you grew up on? Maya's expression flickered, just for a moment. Something painful crossed her features before she locked it away. Sergeant Major David Chun, Marine Corps Scout Sniper. He taught me everything I know about reading wind and calculating ballistics before I was old enough to drive. The name hit the assembled SEALs like a physical force. Ramirez's head snapped up, his eyes widening. Morrison went completely still, his face draining of color. Around them, several of the senior operators exchanged looks of recognition and shock. Ramirez found his voice first, speaking slowly as if testing the reality of what he'd just heard. David Chun, the legend of Ramadi. 2,400-yard confirmed kill in urban environment. That David Chun? Maya's jaw tightened, but she nodded once. That's my father, Chief. Morrison's expression had shifted into something darker, more complicated than simple hostility. His voice came out rough. Chun died in Helmand Province, ambushed during a joint operation. He paused, his eyes boring into Maya's. I was there. The revelation hung in the air between them like smoke. Maya's carefully controlled facade cracked just slightly, her breath catching before she forced herself back to stillness. Morrison watched her reaction with an intensity that suggested he was looking for something specific, some sign of weakness or doubt. Commander Rourke's voice cut through the tension. We don't have time for this. Captain Chun, can you make the 2,000-yard shot or not? Maya turned away from Morrison, away from the memories his words had triggered, and walked to the firing line. Yes, sir. Setting up now. The range officer had the target positioned, 2,000 yards downrange, a simple paper silhouette that looked impossibly small even through the scope. Maya made her adjustments with mechanical precision, checking the scope settings twice. Around her, the crowd had gone quiet. Even Morrison had stepped back, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he watched her prepare. She settled into position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against her shoulder. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath 8 years of flying A-10s and pretending she'd left this part herself behind. Her father's voice echoed in her head, patient and certain. The rifle doesn't know you're afraid, Maya. It only knows whether you believe in the shot. She forced the memory away and focused on the scope. The target wavered in the heat mirage, dancing at the edge of visibility. She read the wind flags, calculated the corrections, and then went completely still. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Impact 2 inches left of center mass. 8 inches low. Wind is gusting east to west at 12 miles per hour, dropping to 8. I'm shooting in the lull. Morrison's voice came from behind her, cold and challenging. Your father's last shot was a miss, Captain. Did he teach you how to handle that kind of pressure too? Maya's finger tightened on the trigger, her breath freezing in her chest. The words hit like a fist to the stomach, bringing with them the memory she'd spent 8 years trying to forget. Her father's funeral, the folded flag, the whispered explanations about what had gone wrong in those final moments. But she didn't move, didn't respond, just waited for her breathing to steady and her heartbeat to slow. Then she took the shot. The bullet's flight seemed to take forever. Maya stayed behind the scope, watching the impact through the magnification. The hole appeared exactly where she called it. 2 inches left of center. 8 inches low. Perfect. The spotter's voice was quiet, almost reverent. Confirmed. Exactly as called. 2,000 yards. The crowd erupted. Cheers and shocked exclamations mixed with the sound of soldiers slapping each other's shoulders in disbelief. But Maya barely heard it. She stayed frozen in position, her hands trembling slightly now that the shot was done. Morrison's words still echoed in her head, cutting deeper than any missed shot ever could. Ramirez appeared at her side, his voice low and genuine. "Ma'am, that was extraordinary. I've seen maybe 5 shooters in my entire career who could make that shot. Your father will be proud." Maya stood slowly, carefully setting the rifle down before her shaking hands could betray her. She turned to face Morrison, who stood apart from the celebrating crowd, his expression carved from granite. Would he, Chief? Because from where I'm standing, all I see is a man who thinks I'm responsible for my father's mistakes. Morrison's jaw worked, but he said nothing. The tension between them was thick enough to cut. Rourke stepped between them, his command voice cutting through everything else. "Captain Shun, you've proven your point. 3 perfect shots. You're authorized for the mission. We move in 20 minutes. Get to the operations center for final briefing." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. She turned and walked away from the range, away from Morrison's accusing stare, away from the cheering soldiers who had no idea what this moment had cost her. Behind her, she heard Ramirez speaking to Morrison in urgent, low tones, but she didn't stop to listen. In the narrow space between 2 containerized housing units, Maya finally stopped. She leaned against the corrugated metal wall, her breath coming faster than it should. From her chest pocket, she pulled out a small photograph, creased and worn for being carried for 8 years. Her father smiled at the camera, his arm around 16-year-old Maya's shoulders at a shooting competition in California. 3 months before he deployed to Afghanistan for the last time. 3 months before the mission that killed him. She whispered to the photo, her voice breaking. "I am sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." Then she tucked it away, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the operations center. There were 4 lives waiting to be saved, and whatever ghost she carried would have to wait. The operations center felt smaller than before, crowded with bodies and tension and the weight of what came next. Maya entered to find the mission briefing already underway. Commander Rourke stood at the digital display, showing satellite imagery of the target compound. Morrison and his team occupied one side of the room, their expressions ranging from skeptical to cautiously impressed. Maya took a position near the back, trying to make herself invisible again. Rourke's voice was all business. Current situation. 3 American contractors from Denton Security and 1 Afghan translator named Fahim Ahmadi are being held in the western building of this compound. Intelligence indicates execution is scheduled for sunset, which gives us 31 minutes. The Taliban knows we're aware of the hostages. They've positioned them specifically to make rescue difficult. He zoomed in on the compound layout. 2 guards on the roof. 3 more in the courtyard. The hostages are in this room here, western wall, 2nd floor. Windows face our shooting position across the valley. The problem is the shot angle and distance make this nearly impossible. Morrison stepped forward, his tactical mind overriding whatever personal conflict he had with Maya. "Commander, even with Captain Shun making the shot, we need to coordinate the extraction. The moment that bullet flies, every Taliban fighter in that compound will go on alert. My team needs to be in position to breach within 60 seconds of the shot." Rourke nodded. "Your team will insert via helicopter to the northern ridgeline here, 300 yards from the compound. Shun takes the shot from the eastern ridge. The moment we have confirmed impact, your team moves. Fast and loud. Get those hostages out before reinforcements arrive from the village. Maya studied the topographical map, her mind already working through the complexities. The compound sat in a bowl of terrain, surrounded by rocky hillsides. The shooting position was elevated but exposed. She spoke up, her voice cutting through the planning. "Sir, what's the wind forecast for the next 40 minutes?" Rourke pulled up the meteorological data. Variable, 8 to 15 miles per hour, gusting from the west. Temperature dropping as the sun lowers. Not ideal. Maya moved closer to the display, her finger tracing the wind path across the valley. The wind will accelerate through this gap between the ridge lines. It'll create turbulence about halfway to the target. I'll need to account for that in the hold-off. She paused, calculating. And the mirage will be severe with the temperature differential between the ridge and the valley floor. One of Morrison's team members, a lean SEAL named Kowalski, spoke up. "Ma'am, with respect, how are you planning to account for all those variables? We've got one shot, maybe two if we're lucky before they move the hostages or execute them." Maya met his eyes steadily. "I read the mirage. It'll tell me what the wind is doing at every point along the bullet's path. The mirage doesn't lie." She gestured to the elevation data. "The bigger problem is the angle. We're shooting down into the valley at a steep decline. The bullet will impact higher than a flat trajectory at this distance. I'll need to adjust for that." Morrison's voice carried an edge of challenge. "And if you miss, Captain, if your calculations are wrong and that bullet goes into the wall instead of the target?" Maya turned to face him directly. "Then 4 people die, Lieutenant Commander. Just like you said, but they're going to die anyway if nobody takes the shot." She held a stare. "My father taught me that the shot you don't take is the one you always miss." Something flickered across Morrison's face. Recognition maybe, or memory. He looked away first, his jaw tight. Rourke's voice broke the tension. "Transport leaves in 15 minutes. Chun, you'll fly to the eastern ridge with Ramirez as your spotter. Morrison, your team inserts to the northern position. Everyone clear?" The room chorused affirmative responses. As the briefing broke up, soldiers moving to gather gear and prepare, Ramirez approached Maya. His weathered face showed concern beneath the professional exterior. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Maya nodded, already knowing what was coming. "Why do you leave the Marines?" David Chin's daughter should have been the most natural sniper recruit in Corps history. "But you went Air Force and you fly close air support instead." Ramirez's voice was gentle, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "That's a hell of a career change." Maya was quiet for a moment, watching Morrison through the doorway as he briefed his team. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "Because from 3,000 feet up, moving at 300 knots, I can protect people without having to make the kind of shot that might haunt me for the rest of my life." She turned to Ramirez. "Turns out that didn't work as well as I'd hoped." Ramirez studied her face, seeing more than she probably wanted to show. "Your father's last mission. Morrison was there. Did you know that before today?" "No." Maya's answer was simple but heavy with implication. "Did you know my father, Chief?" Ramirez nodded slowly. "Met him twice. Once in Ramadi, once at a sniper conference in Quantico. He was exactly what everyone said. Calm, precise, could read terrain like most people read a book." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He was also kind. Spent an hour teaching me a trick for reading mirage in urban environments when he could have been doing a dozen other things. Good man." Maya felt her throat tighten. She managed a nod, not trusting her voice. Ramirez seemed to understand. He gestured toward the door. "Come on, Nam. Let's get you up on that ridge so you can show these SEALs what David Chin's daughter can really do." The helicopter flight to the ridge took 12 minutes. Maya sat in silence, surrounded by combat gear and weapons, watching the Afghan landscape slide past below. The Hindu Kush mountains rose in jagged peaks, beautiful and deadly in the fading light. Beside her, Ramirez checked and rechecked his spotting scope, his movements economical and precise. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. 2 minutes to drop. Maya felt her heartbeat accelerate. Not from fear exactly, but from the weight of what was coming. for lives depending on one trigger press. She closed her eyes and tried to find the calm her father had always shown, the stillness that came from absolute confidence in the fundamentals. The helicopter flared and settled onto the ridge in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. Maya and Ramirez moved quickly, hauling gear toward the shooting position that had been identified from satellite imagery. A natural rock formation provided cover and a stable platform. Ramirez set up the spotting scope while Maya assembled her rifle with practiced efficiency. Below them, the valley spread out in deepening shadow. The compound sat 2,847 yards away according to the laser rangefinder. Maya could see the building where the hostages were held, could make out movement in the courtyard. Taliban fighters preparing for the execution they believed would happen in 23 minutes. Ramirez settled in beside her, his voice calm and professional. Wind is gusting 12 to 14 from the west. I'm seeing significant mirage shimmer halfway down the valley. Temperature at our position is 41 degrees. Valley floor is probably 53, 54. Maya adjusted the scope, focusing on the target building. Through the magnification, she could see the window where intelligence said the hostages were being kept. A figure moved past the opening. Impossible to tell if it was a hostage or a guard from this distance. She began her calculations, factoring in wind, elevation, temperature, the Coriolis effect at this range. Each variable another layer of complexity. Her radio crackled. Morrison's voice came through, tension evident beneath the professional tone. Chun, we're in position. Hostages are visible through the western window. One guard in the room with them. 2 more just outside the door. You have visual? Maya keyed her radio. Confirmed. I have the window. Acquiring target now. Through the scope, she watched. Waited. The guard moved into view, an AK-47 slung across his chest, gesturing at the hostages with aggressive movements. Maya's world narrowed to crosshairs and breathing and the precise moment when all the variables aligned. Morrison's earlier words echoed in her mind. Your father's last shot was a miss. She pushed the thought away and focused on the shot. Only the shot. Nothing else mattered. Maya's breathing fell into the rhythm her father had taught her. For counts in. Hold. For counts out. The rifle became an extension of her body, the scope an extension of her vision. Through the magnification, she could see the guard clearly now. He was young, maybe 25, his movements jerky with nervous energy. Behind him, she could make out the shapes of the hostages huddled against the far wall. Ramirez's voice was soft beside her. Wind's picking up, 14 miles per hour, gusting to 16. Mirage is dancing hard in the middle section. Maya watched the mirage, reading its patterns like a language only shooters understood. The heat waves rose and bent, telling her exactly what the air was doing between her position and the target. She made minute adjustments to her aim point, holding off to compensate for the wind that would push the bullet during its 3-second flight. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, tight with controlled urgency. Chun, we have 18 minutes until sunset. After that, the angle's gone, and so is our shot. What's your status? Maya keyed the radio without taking her eye from the scope. I'm waiting for the wind to settle. It's gusting too hard right now. Be patient. Patience? Morrison's voice carried an edge that went beyond professional tension. Captain, those hostages don't have time for patience. Take the shot. Maya's finger rested lightly on the trigger, but she didn't increase pressure. Lieutenant Commander, if I shoot now in this gust, the bullet drifts 8 inches right. That puts it into the wall instead of the target. The guard lives, the hostages die. I wait for the lull. She could hear Morrison's frustrated exhale over the radio. Chief Ramirez, you seeing what I'm seeing? Ramirez's response was measured, professional. She's right, sir. Wind's too variable right now. We wait for the window. The silence that followed was heavy with Morrison's disapproval, but he didn't countermand her. Maya continued to watch through the scope, her world reduced to crosshairs and mirage and the subtle dance of wind across 2,800 yards of Afghan Valley. Seconds stretched into minutes. The sun continued its descent, painting the mountains in deepening shades of gold and shadow. Ramirez shifted slightly beside her. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" His voice was casual, but Maya recognized the attempt to ease tension. "You said your father taught you everything about shooting. When did you start?" Maya didn't take her eye from the scope. "I was 12 when he first took me to the range. 13 when I started competing. By 15, I was winning state championships in long-range precision." She paused, watching the wind flags. "By 16, I could outshoot most of his Marine Scout sniper students." "That's when Chin took you to Quantico," Ramirez said quietly. "I remember now. There was a junior shooter at that conference who made a 2,200-yard shot on her first attempt. That was you." Maya felt a ghost of a smile touch her lips, there and gone. "My father was so proud that day. He told everyone who would listen that his daughter was going to be the first female Marine Scout sniper." She stopped, the memory souring. 3 months later, he was dead. Ramirez was quiet for a moment. "What happened on that mission, ma'am? If you don't mind me asking." "Morrison won't talk about it. None of the guys who were there will." Maya's jaw tightened. The wind was starting to settle, dropping from 16 to 12 miles per hour. "Almost time." She spoke while continuing to monitor the conditions. "Joint operation. Marines and SEALs clearing a compound in Helmand Province. My father was providing overwatch. Morrison's team was on the ground." She paused, her voice going flat. "Intelligence said the compound was clear of civilians." It wasn't. Ramirez's breath caught. "Oh God, my father had a shot on a Taliban commander. Perfect angle, perfect conditions. But at the last second, a child ran into his sight picture. He hesitated, adjusted, took a harder shot to avoid the kid." Maya's finger tightened slightly on the trigger as the wind continued to drop. He missed. The Taliban commander survived long enough to trigger an ambush. Morrison's team got hit hard. My father and 3 other Marines died trying to get them out. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of old grief and impossible choices. Ramirez finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "That's why Morrison hates you. He thinks your father's hesitation got people killed." Maya's response was barely audible. "Maybe he's right." "No, ma'am." Ramirez's voice was firm. "Your father made the right call. A shooter who won't hesitate to kill a kid isn't a shooter worth having." He paused. "Morrison knows that too, deep down. But trauma makes us blame the wrong people sometimes." The wind dropped to 8 miles per hour. The mirage steadied. Maya's breathing slowed as she entered the zone where nothing existed except the shot. "Stand by." Wind's in the window. Morrison's voice came immediately. "About damn time. You have the shot?" Maya made her final calculations, accounting for every variable she could measure and a few she had to trust the instinct. The guard had stopped moving, standing in profile at the window. Perfect angle. Perfect positioning. She just needed him to stay still for 3 more seconds. Taking the shot, she announced calmly. Her finger increased pressure on the trigger. Smooth, steady, inevitable. The rifle barked, the recoil pushing back against her shoulder. Through the scope, she tracked the bullet's impact point, her breathing suspended as 2,800 yards of physics and precision played out in slow motion. The bullet struck the guard high in the chest, exactly where Maya had aimed. She saw him drop, saw the spray of impact, saw the hostages react in shock and fear. For one perfect moment, everything had gone according to plan. Then the compound exploded into chaos. Taliban fighters poured out of buildings she hadn't known were occupied. Not 3 guards, not 5, at least 15, maybe 20. They scattered toward the hostage building, weapons raised, shouting orders Maya couldn't hear from this distance. Morrison's voice erupted over the radio. "Contact! We've got fighters everywhere. Chun, how many hostiles did intelligence say were in that compound?" Maya's heart hammered in her chest as she watched the situation deteriorate. Intel said 5 to 7 combatants. "I count at least 15, possibly more." Ramirez was already calling adjustments, his spotting scope tracking the Taliban movements. "They're converging on the hostage building. Morrison, you need to move now or those hostages are dead in 60 seconds. Morrison's response was clipped, professional despite the crisis. "Moving." Chun, keep eyes on that window. If anyone goes for those hostages, you drop them. Maya worked the bolt, chambering a fresh round. Already tracking, she acquired a new target, a Taliban fighter sprinting toward the building entrance. The wind had picked up again, gusting unpredictably. She had maybe 2 seconds before he reached the door. She didn't have time to wait for perfect conditions. Didn't have time to calculate every variable. She did what her father had taught her to do when the situation went sideways. Trust your training. Trust your instincts. Take the shot. The rifle barked again. The fighter dropped mid-stride, tumbling forward into the dust. Maya was already working the bolt, acquiring the next threat. Another fighter, this one at the window where the hostages cowered. She fired. Mississippi. The bullet struck the window frame, close enough to make the fighter duck back, but not close enough to stop him. Ramirez's voice was steady beside her, calling corrections. Wind shifted, 11 miles per hour from the west. You're drifting right. Maya made the adjustment and fired again. This time the fighter went down. Through the scope, she could see Morrison's team breaching the compound wall, moving with practiced precision despite being outnumbered 3-1. The firefight that erupted was immediate and brutal. Morrison's voice came through between bursts of gunfire. We're taking heavy contact. Chun, we need close air support. Can you get a bird in the air? Maya's response was automatic, her pilot training overriding the shooter's focus. Negative. Closest air asset is 20 minutes out. You're on your own. Then be my eyes, Morrison snapped. Call out threats as you see them. Maya transitioned from precision shooter to combat controller, calling out Taliban positions as Morrison's team fought their way toward the hostage building. She took shots when she had them, dropping fighters who exposed themselves for too long. But the chaos of close-quarters combat made precise shooting nearly impossible. She was as likely to hit a SEAL as a Taliban fighter at this range, with friendly forces in close proximity. The fight seemed to last forever, but probably took less than 3 minutes. Morrison's team reached the hostages, secured them, and began fighting their way back to the extraction point. Maya provided what cover she could, dropping 2 more fighters who tried to flank the SEAL team. Finally, Morrison's voice came over the radio, breathing hard but triumphant. We have all 4 hostages, wounded but alive. Exfil in progress. Maya sagged slightly against the rifle, adrenaline leaving her system in a rush that made her hands shake. Ramirez placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice warm with approval. Outstanding shooting, ma'am. You just saved 4 lives. But Maya barely heard him. She was watching through the scope as Morrison's team loaded the hostages into the extraction helicopter. Watching as Morrison himself turned back toward her position on the distant ridge, invisible to him at this range, but somehow present in his mind. She wondered what he was thinking, whether the successful mission would change anything, whether he would still see her father's failure when he looked at her. The answer came sooner than expected. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio one final time, and when he spoke, something in his tone had shifted. Chun, that was exceptional work. We'll debrief back at Chapman. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't even acceptance, but it was acknowledgement. For now, that would have to be enough. The helicopter ride back to forward operating base Chapman was loud and chaotic. Maya sat wedged between equipment cases, watching the rescued hostages receive medical attention from the SEAL corpsmen. 2 of the contractors had visible injuries, bruising and cuts from their captivity. The Afghan translator, Fahim, had a split lip and what looked like broken fingers. But they were alive. That was what mattered. Morrison sat across from her, his face streaked with dirt and cordite residue. He hadn't spoken since they'd lifted off, but his eyes kept finding her, studying her with an intensity that made Maya deeply uncomfortable. Not hostile exactly, but not friendly either. Calculating, like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up the way he expected. When they landed at Chapman, Commander Rourke was waiting on the pad. He helped the hostages toward the medical facility, then turned to Maya and Morrison. Debrief in 30 minutes. Get cleaned up and meet me in the operations center. Maya nodded, grateful for the reprieve. She needed time to process what had just happened. Needed to scrub the adrenaline and gunpowder residue and weight of 4 lives saved from her skin. She headed toward her quarters, but Ramirez's voice stopped her. "Ma'am, that was some of the finest shooting I've ever witnessed." The chief's weathered face showed genuine respect. "Your father taught you well." Maya managed a tired smile. "Thank you, Chief. You made it easier by spotting perfectly." Ramirez shook his head. "I just call what I saw. You made the shots. Big difference." He paused, glancing toward where Morrison had disappeared. "For what it's worth, I think Morrison's starting to see past his own ghosts. Give him time." Maya's smile faded. "Time doesn't change what happened to my father, Chief, or who was there when it did. No, ma'am, but understanding might." Ramirez touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of solidarity, then headed toward his own quarters. Maya made it to her containerized housing unit and collapsed onto the narrow cot. Her hands were shaking now that the immediate crisis had passed. Post-adrenaline crash, she recognized intellectually, but it didn't make the trembling any easier to control. She stared at the ceiling, replaying every shot in her mind. The guard dropping, the chaos that followed, the desperate fighting as Morrison's team extracted the hostages. And through it all, Morrison's voice over the radio. Professional, controlled. The voice of a man who had lost people under fire and refused to let it happen again. Just like her father. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome. Maya sat up, pulled the photo from her pocket. Her father's face smiled at her, frozen forever at 43 years old. In the picture, he looked invincible, confident, the kind of man who could make a 2,400-yard shot in urban terrain and change the course of a battle. But he hadn't been invincible. He'd been human. Human enough to hesitate when a child ran into his sight picture. Human enough to take a harder shot rather than kill someone innocent. Human enough to die protecting people he barely knew. Maya's throat tightened. She whispered to the photo, her voice cracking. "You made the right choice, Dad. You did. Morrison's wrong. He has to be wrong." But doubt gnawed at her. What if her father had taken a shot? What if he'd trusted the bullet to miss the child and hit the commander? Would he still be alive? Would those 3 other Marines still be breathing? Would Morrison's team have made it out without losing anyone? The questions had haunted her for 8 years. They were the reason she'd walked away from Marine Scout sniper training. The reason she'd chosen to fly A-10s instead. Providing support from 3,000 feet with a moral calculus felt cleaner, the decisions less immediately lethal. A knock on her door interrupted the spiral of guilt. Maya quickly tucked the photo away and opened the door to find Lieutenant Sam Okoye, one of her fellow A-10 pilots. Sam's dark face split into a wide grin. "Chun, I heard you just pulled off the shot of the century. Had to come see if the rumors were true." Maya stepped aside to let him in, grateful for the distraction. "The rumors are probably exaggerated." Sam laughed and sat on the single chair in the cramped space. "Kowalski says you dropped a target at 2,800 yards with one shot, then provided precision fire for the entire extraction. That sound exaggerated to you?" Maya sat back on the cot, suddenly exhausted. "I got lucky. The conditions aligned." "Bull." Sam's voice was gentle but firm. "I've flown with you for 2 years, Maya. You don't do anything by luck. You plan, you calculate, you execute. Same as flying." He studied her face. "So why do you look like someone who just lost instead of won?" Maya was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "Because Morrison was there when my father died. And every time he looks at me, I can see him wondering if I'm going to freeze up like he thinks my father did." Sam's expression shifted to understanding. "The Helmand Province mission. I heard about that. Wasn't your father the one who hesitated to avoid civilian casualties?" Maya nodded. "He took a harder shot instead. Missed. Taliban commander survived long enough to spring an ambush. 4 Marines died, including my dad. And Morrison blames your father for that," Sam said softly. Maya's jaw tightened. "I don't know what Morrison thinks, but I know what I think every time I close my eyes. I think maybe if I'd been there, if I'd made that shot instead of my father, he'd still be alive." Sam leaned forward, his voice intense. "Maya, you were 16 years old. You weren't even in the military yet." "I know." Maya's voice broke slightly. "But I was good enough. I could have made that shot. I know I could have. The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding. Sam had lost his brother to an IED in Iraq. He knew the weight of survivor's guilt, the impossible math of what if and if only. When he finally spoke, his words carried the authority of experience. Your father made a choice. A hard one, maybe even the right one. The fact that it ended badly doesn't make it wrong. He paused. And you making this shot today doesn't mean you have to carry his burden. You saved 4 lives, Maya. That's what matters. Maya wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the satisfaction of the successful mission instead of this gnawing emptiness. But all she could think about was Morrison's face, the calculation in his eyes, the unspoken question of whether David Chen's daughter could be trusted when the stakes were highest. A knock on the door interrupted them. Ramirez's voice came through. Captain Chun, Commander wants you in the operations center now. Debriefs starting early. Maya stood, squaring her shoulders. Sam rose with her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Whatever happens in there, remember you just did something extraordinary. Don't let anyone take that from you. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. She followed Ramirez through the compound to the operations center. Inside, Morrison was already present, cleaned up but still wearing the residue of combat in his eyes. Commander Rourke stood at the central table, surrounded by mission footage and after-action data. Captain Chun, take a seat. Rourke's voice was neutral, professional. We need to discuss what happened out there. Maya sat, hyper-aware of Morrison's presence across the table. Rourke pulled up drone footage from the mission, showing the compound from overhead. The initial shot, the chaos that followed, the firefight and extraction. Rourke spoke without preamble. Intelligence failure. We were told 5 to 7 combatants. Actual count was 18. He looked at Maya. Your first shot was perfect. Textbook precision under extreme conditions. But the follow-up situation nearly got Morrison's team killed. Maya's stomach dropped. Sir, I provided covering fire throughout the extraction. I dropped multiple targets to protect the team. I know you did. Rourke's voice wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't warm either. And you probably saved lives doing it. But the question we need to answer is whether the initial shot was worth the risk given the bad intelligence. Morrison's voice cut through, sharp and unexpected. The shot was worth it, Commander. Chun did exactly what we asked her to do. The intelligence failure isn't on her. Maya's head snapped up, staring at Morrison in shock. He met her eyes, his expression unreadable. Rourke studied them both. Lieutenant Commander, you were vocal in your opposition to Captain Chun taking the shot. What changed? Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his words measured and deliberate. I watched her work today. Under pressure. Under fire. When the situation went to hell, she adapted. She didn't freeze. She didn't hesitate. He paused. She did what needed to be done, just like her father would have. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. Morrison continued, his voice rough. I was wrong about her, sir. My objections were based on old trauma, not current reality. Captain Chun earned my respect today. She earned it completely. Rourke nodded slowly. Very well. Captain Chun, you're commended for exceptional marksmanship under combat conditions. For hostages recovered alive. Mission successful despite intelligence failures. Dismissed. Maya stood on shaking legs. Morrison caught her eye as she turned to leave, and for the first time, she saw something other than hostility in his gaze. Something that looked almost like understanding, almost like regret. Outside the operations center, Maya leaned against the wall and tried to process what had just happened. Morrison had defended her, praised her, compared her to her father in a way that wasn't an accusation, but didn't feel like victory. It felt like the beginning of something she wasn't ready to face. The truth about her father's death. The reality of Morrison's trauma. The weight of living up to a legend while trying to forge her own path. She pulled out the photo one more time, studying her father's face in the fading light. I don't know if I can do this, Dad, she whispered. I don't know if I'm strong enough. But 4 hostages were alive tonight who wouldn't have been without her. That had to count for something. It had to be enough. Maya couldn't sleep. She lay on her cot in the darkness, staring at the corrugated metal ceiling of her housing unit, replaying Morrison's words over and over. She did what needed to be done, just like her father would have. The comparison should have felt like validation. Instead, it felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. At 300 hours, she gave up trying to rest. She dressed and walked through the quiet base toward the small memorial area near the perimeter wall. Forward Operating Base Chapman maintained a simple monument to fallen service members, names etched into a black granite stone that gleamed dully under the security lights. Maya had avoided this place since arriving in Afghanistan, but tonight the pull was too strong to resist. She found her father's name in the third column. Sergeant Major David Chun, United States Marine Corps. The letters were precise, permanent, offering no hint of the man behind them. No indication that he'd been a patient teacher, a fierce competitor, a father who believed his daughter could do anything. Maya traced the letters with her fingertip, her voice barely a whisper. "I made the shot today, Dad. The one you would have made. But I still don't understand why you missed yours." The sound of boots on gravel made her turn. Morrison emerged from the shadows, his face haggard in the pale light. He stopped when he saw her, clearly not expecting company at this hour. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Morrison moved closer, his eyes finding David Chin's name on the wall. "Can't sleep either?" His voice was rough, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Maya shook her head. Too much adrenaline. Too many questions. Morrison stood beside her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. He stared at her father's name for a long moment before speaking. "I owe you an explanation. About what happened in Helmand Province. About why I've been such a bastard since you showed up." Maya's throat tightened. "You don't owe me anything, Lieutenant Commander." "Yeah, you do." Morrison's jaw worked, his eyes never leaving the memorial wall. "Because I've been blaming your father for 8 years for something that wasn't his fault. And I took that out on you today when you didn't deserve it." The admission hung in the air between them. Maya waited, sensing that Morrison needed to say this, needed to unburden himself of whatever he'd been carrying. When he continued, his voice was thick with suppressed emotion. The mission was supposed to be simple. Clear a compound, capture a high-value target. Your father was providing overwatch from a rooftop 400 yards out. Perfect position, perfect sightlines. Morrison paused, his hands clenching into fists. "We breached the compound, and it went sideways immediately. The HVT wasn't there. Instead, we walked into a prepared ambush. Fighters everywhere, civilians mixed in, complete chaos." Maya felt her heart hammering, but said nothing. Morrison's words came faster now, like a dam breaking. "Your father had eyes on the Taliban commander who was coordinating the ambush. Clean shot, maybe 350 yards. He called it in, said he could take it. I gave him the green light." Morrison's voice cracked slightly. Then a kid ran into his sight picture. Maybe 8 years old, running from the fighting. "Your father called ceasefire, said he couldn't take the shot without risking the child." Maya's breath caught. "That's not what I was told. I was told he missed." Morrison turned to face her fully, his expression raw. "He didn't miss, Captain. He never fired. Command was screaming at him to take the shot anyway, saying the tactical value outweighed the risk. Your father refused. He repositioned, tried to get a different angle. By the time he had a clear shot, the commander had moved into a building. Your father went in after him. The world seemed to tilt sideways." Maya grabbed the memorial wall for support, her father's name rough under her palm. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your father made a choice." Morrison's voice was fierce now, urgent. He chose not to kill a kid for a tactical advantage. When command ordered him to take the shot anyway, he disobeyed. Then he went into that building to finish the job and get us out. Morrison's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "He saved my team, Maya. All of us. We were pinned down, taking casualties, about to be overrun. Your father led the counter-assault that broke the ambush. He and 3 other Marines died, getting us to the extraction point." Maya felt like she couldn't breathe. 8 years of believing her father had missed. 8 years of guilt and shame and wondering if she could have done better. And it had all been based on a lie. Why? Her voice came out strangled, barely audible. Why would they tell me he missed? Why would they let me believe he failed? Morrison's face twisted with anger and regret. Because he disobeyed a direct order. Because command wanted to classify the whole mess to avoid questions about why they ordered a sniper to shoot through a civilian child. Morrison's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They wrote it up as a missed shot in a fluid tactical situation. Clean. Simple. No uncomfortable questions about rules of engagement or civilian casualties. Maya's legs gave out. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold ground, her world reordering itself around this new terrible truth. Morrison crouched beside her, his voice gentle now. Your father was the bravest man I ever served with. Not because he could make impossible shots, though he could, but because he knew when not to pull the trigger. He valued that kid's life more than his own tactical advantage, more than his career. Morrison paused. More than his own life, as it turned out. Tears streamed down Maya's face, hot and unstoppable. I thought he failed. I thought he froze. I thought if I'd been there, I could have made the shot he missed. Morrison's hand found her shoulder, gripping firmly. There was no shot to make, Maya. Your father didn't freeze. He didn't fail. He made the hardest choice a shooter can make. He chose humanity over mission accomplishment. And then he paid for it with his life. The sobs came then, 8 years of grief and guilt pouring out in the darkness beside the memorial wall. Morrison stayed beside her, this man who had blamed her father for so long, now bearing witness to her breakdown with quiet understanding. When Maya could finally speak again, her voice was hoarse. Why are you telling me this now? Why not let me keep believing the lie? Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because I watched you today, I saw you make impossible shots under impossible conditions. I saw you adapt when everything went wrong. And I realized something. His voice grew thick. You just like him. You have his skill, his discipline, his calm under fire. But I also saw you hesitate for half a second on that first shot. Not because you couldn't make it, but because you were afraid of becoming him. Maya looked up at Morrison, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as an enemy or an antagonist, but as someone carrying his own trauma, his own impossible choices. I've been afraid of freezing, she admitted. Afraid that when the moment came, I'd hesitate like I thought my father did. That's why I became a pilot. From the cockpit, the decisions feel cleaner, less personal. Morrison shook his head. Your father didn't hesitate out of fear, Maya. He hesitated out of principle. There's a difference. He paused. And today, you proved you have that same principle. You waited for the right conditions, even when I was screaming at you to shoot. You trusted your training over external pressure. That takes courage. They sat in silence for a long moment, two warriors beside a memorial wall, both carrying ghosts they were finally learning to understand. Finally, Maya spoke, her voice steadier now. The after-action report. The classified one. Does it say what really happened? Morrison nodded. Commander Rourke has access. I requested it after the debrief today. After watching you work, I needed to know the truth. Needed to stop blaming your father for surviving when he didn't. Maya stood slowly, Morrison rising with her. Can I see it? The real report? Morrison met her eyes. I already asked Rourke. He's waiting for us in his office. Figured you'd want answers. Together, they walked through the quiet base toward the command building. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, dawn approaching with the inevitability of all painful truths finally coming to light. Maya felt different somehow. Lighter, like a weight she'd been carrying for 8 years had finally shifted, not gone but transformed into something she could bear. Morrison walked beside her, no longer an enemy, but something else. An ally, maybe, or simply someone who understood the cost of service, the weight of impossible choices, and the courage it took to live with both. As they reached the command building, Morrison stopped her with a hand on her arm. Maya, your father would be proud of you, not just for the shooting, though that was exceptional, but for who you've become despite carrying his ghost for so long. Maya nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Together, they entered the building to face the truth that had been buried for 8 years. Whatever the report said, whatever details it revealed, Maya knew one thing with absolute certainty now. Her father hadn't failed. He'd chosen, and that choice, however costly, had been an act of courage that deserved to be remembered truthfully. The lies were about to end. The truth, finally, was about to begin. Commander Rourke's office was small and austere, illuminated by a single desk lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. The classified file sat on his desk, a manila folder marked with red diagonal stripes and security classifications that made Maya's stomach clench. Rourke looked up as they entered, his weathered face showing no surprise at their arrival before dawn. "I figured you'd want to see this sooner rather than later." His voice was gentle, understanding. "Captain Chun, what you're about to read is going to be difficult. But Lieutenant Commander Morrison felt you deserved to know the truth about your father's final mission." Maya sat in the chair Rourke indicated, Morrison taking the seat beside her. The commander slid the file across the desk. "It's all here. The real after-action report, the radio transcripts, the command decisions." He paused, his eyes meeting Maya's. "Your father was an extraordinary Marine. What happened to him was a failure of leadership, not a failure of his own." Maya's hands trembled as she opened the file. The first page was standard military documentation, mission parameters, and personnel assignments. But as she turned to the second page, the radio transcripts, the truth began to unfold in stark black text. Timestamp 0942. Scout Sniper Chun reports visual on HVT, requesting authorization to engage. Command approves. Timestamp 0943. Chun reports civilian child entering site picture, requests ceasefire. Command denies, orders shot to be taken immediately. Timestamp 0944. Chun refuses direct order, states he will not risk civilian casualty for tactical gain. Command repeats order with increasing urgency. Timestamp 0945. Chun repositions for alternate angle. HVT moves into structure. Ground team taking heavy fire. Maya's vision blurred with tears as she read her father's actual words, preserved forever in the radio logs. His voice calm and professional even as he disobeyed orders that violated everything he believed in. Morrison leaned closer, reading over her shoulder, his presence a solid anchor in the storm of emotion threatening to overwhelm her. The next section detailed what happened after her father entered the building. The classified report was brutally honest in a way the sanitized version had never been. Sergeant Major Chun led a four-man team into the structure to neutralize the HVT and break the ambush. Heavy resistance encountered. Chun personally eliminated 6 enemy combatants while directing his team to create an egress route for pinned SEAL element. Morrison's voice was quiet beside her. "That's when he found me. My team was trapped in a courtyard, 3 wounded, out of ammunition. Your father came through a wall, literally, breached it with explosives, and led his Marines straight into the kill zone to get us out." Maya turned the page, her heart breaking with each new detail. The report described the desperate fighting retreat. Her father providing covering fire while Morrison's team and the remaining Marines withdrew. The moment when enemy fire found him. The medic's attempts to save him. His final words. She read those words 3 times, her father's voice echoing in her memory. "Tell my daughter she was right. The shot isn't worth taking if you lose yourself making it." The tears fell freely now, splashing onto the paper. Morrison's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. Maya looked up at Rourke, her voice breaking. Why did they bury this? Why did they let everyone think he missed instead of telling the truth that he was a hero? Rourke's face was grim, because the truth was politically inconvenient. Because admitting that command ordered a sniper to shoot through a civilian child would have created scandal. Because covering it up as a missed shot in a chaotic environment was cleaner for everyone involved. He paused. Everyone except the people who loved David Chun and deserved to know how he really died. Morrison spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have said something years ago. Should have demanded the truth be told. But I was dealing with my own trauma, my own survivor's guilt." He looked at Maya, his eyes haunted. "I convinced myself that if your father had just taken the shot, maybe things would have been different. Maybe he'd still be alive. It was easier to blame him than to accept that command put us all in an impossible situation." Maya closed the file with shaking hands. She felt hollowed out, grief and rage and relief all churning together in a toxic mixture. For 8 years, she'd carried the weight of her father's supposed failure, had walked away from Marine Scout sniper training because she couldn't bear to follow in the footsteps of someone she thought had frozen when it mattered most, had chosen to fly instead, putting distance between herself and the shot she feared she might miss. All of it based on a lie. Rourke stood, moving to a small safe in the corner of his office. He retrieved something and returned to the desk, placing it in front of Maya. Your father was recommended for the Navy Cross, for extraordinary heroism in the face of the enemy, for refusing an unlawful order and then proving his courage by personally leading the assault that saved Morrison's entire team. Maya stared at the citation document, her father's name at the top in formal script. Why didn't he receive it? Because accepting the Navy Cross would have required explaining what order he refused and why. Rourke's voice was bitter. Command decided it was better to let him be remembered as a skilled sniper who died in combat, rather than a hero who disobeyed them. They offered your mother a Silver Star instead, with a generic citation that avoided any uncomfortable details. Maya remembered the ceremony, the flag presentation, the Silver Star in its velvet case that her mother had accepted with quiet dignity while 16-year-old Maya stood rigid beside her, trying not to cry. She thought it was an honor. Now she understood it was a consolation prize. Hush money in the form of a medal. Morrison's voice pulled her back to the present. Maya, I need you to understand something. What your father did that day changed me. Changed how I think about rules of engagement, about the cost of blind obedience, about what real courage looks like. He paused. When I watched you hesitate on that ridge yesterday, waiting for the right conditions instead of taking a rush shot because I was pressuring you, I realized you have his strength, his moral courage, not just his shooting skills. Maya looked at Morrison, seeing the genuine respect in his eyes, seeing the man behind the hostility, the trauma, the misplaced blame. Thank you for telling me, for bringing me here. I spent 8 years thinking I failed him by not being there, thinking if I'd been good enough, fast enough, I could have made the shot he missed. Morrison shook his head firmly. There was no shot to make, Maya. Your father made the only choice a decent human being could make, and he paid for it by doing something even braver. He went into hell to pull people out. That's not failure. That's heroism. They sat in silence for a moment, the classified file between them containing truths that should have been told 8 years ago. Finally, Maya spoke, her voice steadier now. What happens to this information? Does it stay buried forever? Rourke considered the question carefully. That's partially up to you, Captain. The mission is still classified, but the details of your father's courage, his refusal to follow an immoral order, his actions that saved lives, those deserve to be known. He paused. If you want to pursue getting him the recognition he earned, I'll support that effort. It won't be easy. Command will resist, but it's possible. Maya thought about her mother, who had spent 8 years believing the sanitized version of events. Thought about the Marine Scout snipers who trained using her father's techniques without knowing the full measure of his character. Thought about all the young shooters who deserved to know that real strength sometimes meant not pulling the trigger. Yes, she said quietly. He deserves the truth. We all do. Morrison stood, extending his hand to Maya. She took it, their handshake firm and meaningful. I'm sorry for how I treated you, Captain, for the things I said about your father, for blaming you for ghosts that were never yours to carry. Maya managed a small smile through her tears. You were carrying your own ghosts, Lieutenant Commander. We all are. Maybe it's time we start helping each other put them down. As they left Rourke's office, dawn was breaking fully over the Afghan mountains. The base was coming to life around them, soldiers heading to morning formation, the smell of breakfast drifting from the dining facility. The world continuing on as if everything hadn't just fundamentally changed. But for Maya, everything had changed. She wasn't the daughter of a sniper who had failed anymore. She was the daughter of a hero who had succeeded in the most important way possible. He'd kept his humanity even when ordered to abandon it. He'd chosen principle over tactics. He'd saved lives at the cost of his own. Morrison walked beside her toward the flight line, where her A-10 waited in its revetment. He spoke quietly, his words carrying the weight of hard-won understanding. Your father once told me something during a training exercise. He said the hardest shots aren't the ones at extreme distance or in bad conditions. The hardest shots are the ones you choose not to take. Maya stopped, turning to face Morrison fully. I understand that now. Finally, Morrison nodded. Good, because that understanding makes you more than just a skilled shooter, Maya. It makes you someone worth following. Someone your father would have been proud to serve alongside. He paused. Someone I'm proud to serve alongside. The words settled into Maya's chest, warm and healing in a way she hadn't expected. For the first time in 8 years, the weight of her father's memory felt like something other than a burden. It felt like a gift, a legacy not of failure, but of courage. Not a missed shot, but of the strength to refuse one. She looked toward the mountains, toward the valley where yesterday she'd made an impossible shot to save 4 lives. Her father's training had made that possible. But his example had made her the kind of person who would wait for the right conditions, who would refuse to be rushed into a shot that might cost innocent lives. Thank you, Dad, she whispered to the morning air, for teaching me how to shoot, and for teaching me when not to. The next 48 hours passed in a strange calm. Maya flew her scheduled missions, providing close air support for ground operations with a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Each gun run, each precision strike felt different now. Not just a tactical action, but a continuation of her father's legacy. Protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Using violence precisely and only when necessary. Morrison's attitude had shifted completely. Where before he'd been hostile and dismissive, now he sought her out. Asked her opinion on mission planning. Included her in tactical discussions normally reserved for ground forces. The other SEALs noticed the change, their own skepticism melting into cautious respect. On the 3rd morning after the mission, Maya was performing post-flight checks on her A-10 when Ramirez approached. His weathered face showed concern beneath the professional exterior. Ma'am, Morrison wants to see you in the operations center. Something's come up. Maya secured her aircraft and followed Ramirez across the base. Inside the operations center, she found Morrison studying satellite imagery with Commander Rourke and several intelligence analysts. Morrison looked up as she entered, his expression grim. We have a problem. He gestured to the display. Taliban activity has spiked in the region since the hostage rescue. They're consolidating forces, moving weapons. Intelligence suggests they're planning a major assault. He paused, his jaw tight. On this base, Maya studied the imagery, seeing the telltale signs. Vehicle movements. Personnel gathering at known Taliban safe houses. The pattern was unmistakable. When? Best estimate is within the next 72 hours. Rourke's voice was measured but tense. They want revenge for the rescue operation, for the fighters we killed, and they want to prove they can strike a fortified American position. How many? Maya asked. Conservative estimate is 200 fighters. Maybe more. Rourke pulled up force disposition maps. We have 80 personnel on this base, half of them support staff. Even with air support, we're looking at a significant battle. Morrison turned to Maya, his expression intense. I need to know something, Captain. When things get bad down here, when my team is in contact and calling for close air support, can I trust you to be there? His voice softened slightly, not just as a pilot, as someone who understands what we're fighting for. Maya met his eyes without hesitation. You can trust me, Lieutenant Commander. Absolutely. The attack came 36 hours later, in the dead of night when human awareness is at its lowest ebb. Maya was asleep when the first rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the perimeter wall, the explosion jerking her awake with adrenaline already flooding her system. She was dressed and running toward the flight line before the base alarm finished its first rotation. Around her, forward operating base Chapman erupted into chaos. Small arms fire crackled from multiple directions. More RPGs streaked through the darkness, their trails like meteor strikes. Explosions blossomed in orange flowers of destruction. The Taliban had chosen their moment perfectly, hitting the base from three sides simultaneously. Maya sprinted to her A-10, Chief Ramirez appearing beside her with her flight gear. He'd anticipated her need, prepared her aircraft for immediate launch. She suited up on the run, muscle memory taking over as tracer rounds cut through the air above them. Morrison's voice crackled over the base radio, sharp and controlled despite the chaos. All defensive positions. We have multiple breaches on the north and west walls. Estimate 150 hostiles. Hold your positions and wait for air support. Maya was in her cockpit now, running through the fastest pre-flight check of her career. Ramirez stood by the aircraft, his rifle raised, providing security as she brought systems online. The A-10's engines spooled up with their distinctive whine, the sound of salvation to ground forces who knew what that aircraft could do. Tower, this is Hog 2-1 requesting immediate emergency takeoff clearance. Maya's voice was calm, professional, every bit of her training focused on the task ahead. Hog 2-1, you are cleared for immediate departure. Tower's response came between explosions. Godspeed. Maya taxied fast, not waiting for the runway to be fully clear. Taliban fighters had penetrated the perimeter near the eastern fence, their muzzle flashes visible in the darkness. She pushed the throttles forward and felt the A-10 leap into the Afghan night, banking hard as soon as she had altitude. From the air, the scale of the assault became terrifyingly clear. The Taliban had brought everything they had. Technical vehicles with mounted heavy weapons. Mortar teams walking fire across the base. Infantry in coordinated assault teams pressing toward critical infrastructure. This wasn't a raid. It was an attempt to overrun the entire position. Morrison's voice came through her headset, strained now. Hog 2-1, we need danger close support on the north wall. They're about to breach the command building. Friendlies are marked with infrared strobes. Maya rolled in, her eyes picking out the IR markers through her targeting pod. The Taliban fighters were less than 50 yards from Morrison's position, advancing under covering fire. She armed her Gu-8 Avenger cannon, 30 millimeter of precision destruction, and began her run. The gun run was textbook perfect, her cannon fire walking across the Taliban position with devastating accuracy. Bodies fell. The technical vehicle exploded. The assault faltered, but there were too many of them, and more kept coming. Good hits, Morrison called, but we're getting overrun on the west side now. They're inside the wire. Maya pulled up and repositioned, her mind calculating angles and distances with the same precision she'd used on the sniper rifle. Each gun run had to be perfect. Too close, and she'd hit friendly forces. Too far, and the Taliban would continue their advance. She threaded the needle again and again, her A-10 becoming an extension of her will. But the base was large, and the enemy was everywhere. She couldn't be in three places at once. As she made another run on the western perimeter, she saw Taliban fighters reaching the containerized housing units. Her housing unit, Samoquis, the support staff who had no combat training. Morrison, they're in the housing area. Maya's voice remained controlled, but urgency bled through. I need ground response there now, or we're going to lose people. Morrison's response came between bursts of gunfire. I can't pull anyone from the walls. We'll collapse. Can you suppress them from the air? Maya looked at her fuel gauge. She had maybe 20 minutes of station time left before she'd need to return to base. Except the base was currently a combat zone with Taliban fighters on the runway. Landing wasn't an option. Her next nearest diversion was 40 minutes away. She made the decision in seconds. Negative. I'm coming down. Morrison's voice exploded over the radio. What? Chun, you cannot land that aircraft in a hot LZ. Not landing, Lieutenant Commander. Maya was already descending, her training as a pilot warring with instincts she'd inherited from her father. Sometimes you can't solve the problem from 3,000 feet up. Sometimes you have to get your boots on the ground. She brought the A-10 down to 200 feet, flying directly over the Taliban fighters in the housing area. Their fire turned skyward, tracers reaching for her aircraft. She felt impacts, heard the distinctive sound of rounds punching through her airframe. The A-10 was built to take punishment, But every aircraft had limits. Maya triggered her cannon, the burst precise and devastating. The Taliban fighters scattered, seeking cover. She pulled up hard, her aircraft shuddering from the damage it had taken. Warning lights illuminated her cockpit like a Christmas tree. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Fuel leak detected. Flight control damage. Hawk 2-1, you're smoking, the tower called. Recommend immediate egress and divert to Bagram. Maya looked down at the base. At Morrison's team fighting desperately on the north wall. At the housing units where non-combatants sheltered. At the memorial wall where her father's name was etched in stone. She thought about the choice he'd made 8 years ago. About refusing to take the easy shot because it would cost an innocent life. Negative tower. I'm staying until this is done. She made 3 more gun runs, her damaged aircraft responding sluggishly but still flying. Each pass pushed the Taliban back, gave the defenders breathing room. But her fuel was critical now, her hydraulics barely functional. She had 1 more run in her, maybe 2 before she'd have no choice but to attempt a landing on the damaged runway. Morrison's voice came through, and for the first time, she heard something close to fear. Chun, you need to get out of there. Your aircraft is done. We can hold until reinforcements arrive. Maya lined up her final approach, the Taliban massing for one last push on the eastern wall. She could see Morrison's position, could see the desperate last stand developing. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. The hardest shots are the ones you choose not to take. But sometimes, she realized, the hardest choice was refusing to walk away when people needed you most. This is Hog 2-1 finals. She armed her remaining ordnance. Danger close. 30 seconds. The gun run was perfect, her cannon fire breaking the Taliban assault just as they reached Morrison's position. Explosions rippled across enemy formations. The assault collapsed into chaos and retreat. Maya pulled up, her aircraft groaning in protest, multiple systems failing simultaneously. Tower, Hog 2-1 declaring emergency. Attempting landing now. The runway was cratered from mortar fire, littered with debris, barely visible through the smoke and darkness. Maya fought the dying aircraft down, her hands steady despite everything screaming at her to eject. The A-10 hit hard, bounced, settled. She reversed thrust with engines that were second from failure and brought the wounded bird to a stop 50 yards from the end of usable runway. Emergency crews were already moving, but Morrison got there first. He pulled her cockpit open, his face streaked with soot and blood. You are absolutely insane, Captain Chun. Maya unstrapped with shaking hands, adrenaline finally hitting her system now that the immediate crisis had passed. Learn from the best, Lieutenant Commander. Morrison helped her down from the aircraft, both of them turning to survey the damage to her A-10. The aircraft looked like it had been through a shredder. Holes punched through wings and fuselage, hydraulic fluid pooling beneath. One engine smoking ominously. You just landed an aircraft that should have fallen out of the sky 10 minutes ago. Morrison's voice carried awe and respect. Your father would be proud. Hell, I am proud. Around them, the base was securing. The Taliban assault had broken, the survivors retreating into the mountains. Dawn was beginning to paint the sky in shades of red and gold. Forward operating base Chapman had held, battered but unbroken. Maya looked toward the memorial wall, barely visible through the smoke. Thanks, Dad, she whispered, for teaching me that some things are worth the risk. The sun rose over forward operating base Chapman, revealing the full scope of the night's battle. Smoke still drifted from burning vehicles and damaged structures. Medics moved between wounded soldiers, their urgent voices calling for supplies and assistance. The perimeter walls bore the scars of RPG impacts and small arms fire. But the base had held. Maya sat on the wing of her destroyed A-10, watching the organized chaos of post-battle recovery. Her hands still trembled slightly from adrenaline, her flight suit soaked with sweat despite the morning chill. The aircraft beneath her would never fly again. The maintenance chief had confirmed what Maya already knew. The A-10 had given everything it had, and then some. Commander Rourke approached, his face showing the exhaustion of a man who had spent the night coordinating a desperate defense. Captain Chun, I need you to walk me through your decision-making process last night. Specifically, the choice to continue operations with a critically damaged aircraft. Maya met his eyes steadily. Sir, the tactical situation required close air support. Diverting would have left the base without aerial coverage during the heaviest fighting. The aircraft was damaged, but still mission-capable. I made the judgment call to continue. Rourke was quiet for a moment, studying her face. That aircraft should have killed you. The maintenance report shows hydraulic failure, fuel system damage, flight control degradation. You landed a dying machine on a cratered runway in the dark. He paused. That's not standard operating procedure, Captain. That's a pilot choosing to risk her life rather than abandon people who needed her. Maya thought about her father entering that building in Helmand Province, about Morrison's words describing how David Chun had led his Marines into hell to pull people out. Yes, sir. That's exactly what it was. Rourke's expression shifted to something between respect and concern. I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. What you did last night was extraordinary. But I also need to know this wasn't a suicide mission, that you weren't trying to prove something at the cost of your own life. Maya shook her head firmly. I wasn't trying to die, sir. I was trying to make sure other people didn't. There's a difference. A commotion near the base entrance drew their attention. A convoy of vehicles was arriving, reinforcements from Bagram Airfield bringing fresh troops and supplies. Among them, Maya recognized the distinctive uniform markings of a Marine Scout sniper unit. Her heart clenched as she watched them dismount. These warriors who carried on her father's tradition. Morrison appeared at her side, his tactical vest still stained with the previous night's combat. Those are the Marines who are taking over long-range security for the base. He glanced at her. Their team leader specifically requested to meet you. A Marine gunnery sergeant approached, his weathered face showing the marks of multiple deployments. His name tape read Kowalski. He stopped in front of Maya and came to attention. Captain Chun, permission to speak freely, ma'am. Maya slid down from the aircraft wing, suddenly aware of how disheveled she looked compared to the crisp Marine. Granted, Gunny. Kowalski's voice was rough with emotion. I served with your father in Ramadi. He was my team leader, my mentor, and the finest Marine I ever knew. When I heard David Chin's daughter was here, making impossible shots and flying close air support like some kind of guardian angel, I had to come see for myself. Maya felt her throat tighten. She managed to keep her voice steady. My father spoke highly of the Marines he served with, Gunny. I'm sure you were among them. Kowalski shook his head. Ma'am, with respect, your father was the one we all looked up to. Not just because he could shoot better than anyone else, though he could, but because he taught us that being a good shooter meant knowing when not to pull the trigger. He paused, his eyes intense. I was there in Helmand Province. I was one of the Marines who went into that building with him. The world seemed to stop. Maya stared at Kowalski, barely breathing. You were there when he died? Yes, ma'am. Kowalski's voice dropped lower, heavy with memory. Your father refused that shot. Command was screaming at him to fire, but he wouldn't risk the kid. I remember thinking he was going to get court-martialed. Instead, he handed me his rifle and said, Gunny, sometimes the most important shot is the one you don't take. Then he grabbed his carbine and led us into that building. Maya's hands clenched at her sides. Morrison stepped closer, his presence supportive. Kowalski continued, his words coming faster now, like he'd been waiting years to say them. He saved all of us that day, ma'am. Not just Lieutenant Commander Morrison's SEAL team, but my Marines too. We were all pinned down, taking casualties, about to be overrun. Your father moved through that building like death itself, clearing rooms, directing our fire, getting us organized. Kowalski's voice cracked slightly. When he got hit, he was covering our withdrawal. His last words to me were, tell my daughter I love her and I'm proud of her. The tears Maya had been holding back finally fell. She'd known her father's final words from the official report, but hearing them from someone who had been there, who had held him as he died, made them real in a way nothing else could. Kowalski wasn't finished. He reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. Your father gave me this before we went into that building. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure it got to you. He held out the bundle. I've been carrying it for 8 years, ma'am, waiting for the chance to complete that mission. Maya took the cloth with shaking hands and unwrapped it. Inside was her father's scout sniper badge, the one he'd worn on every deployment. The metal was worn smooth in places from years of service. Pinned to the cloth was a handwritten note in her father's distinctive script. Maya, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. I need you to know something. Being a good shooter isn't about hitting every target. It's about choosing your targets wisely. It's about having the courage to hold fire when pulling the trigger would be easier, but wrong. You already understand this better than most shooters ever will. Trust yourself, trust your training, and never lose your humanity for tactical advantage. I love you more than words can say. Keep flying high. Dad. Maya clutched the badge and note to her chest, sobs shaking her shoulders. Morrison's hand found her back, steady and supportive. Kowalski stood at attention, tears streaming down his own face. Around them, the base continued its recovery operations, but in this moment, time seemed suspended. When Maya could finally speak, her voice was hoarse. Thank you, Gunny, for being with him, for carrying this, for completing his mission. Kowalski's salute was sharp and precise. It was an honor, ma'am. Your father was the best of us. And for what I hear about your actions last night, you're following in his footsteps in all the ways that matter. As Kowalski rejoined his unit, Maya stood holding her father's badge, feeling the weight of his legacy settling into place. Not as a burden anymore, but as a gift. A reminder that courage came in many forms. That strength meant knowing your limits and exceeding them only when others needed you to. That being a warrior meant never losing sight of why you fought in the first place. Morrison spoke quietly beside her. Your father's letter. He knew even back then what kind of person you'd become. Maya wiped her eyes, managing a small smile. He always saw the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. Rourke approached again, his expression serious. Captain Shun, I hate to interrupt, but we have a situation developing. Intelligence reports Taliban regrouping in the mountains. They're not done. He paused, and we just received word that a high-value target has been identified in the area. The same commander who ordered the assault on this base. Morrison's jaw tightened. The same one from Helmand Province? The one your father was originally sent to eliminate? Rourke nodded grimly. One and the same. He's been operating in this region for 8 years, always staying one step ahead. But the assault on this base drew him out. We have a location. He looked between Maya and Morrison, and we have a very narrow window to act. Maya's fingers tightened on her father's badge. She looked at Morrison, seeing the same determination in his eyes that she felt building in her chest. This wasn't just another mission. This was a chance to finish what her father had started 8 years ago, to close the circle in a way that honored his memory and his choice. How narrow a window, sir? Maya asked. 12 hours, Rourke replied. After that, he'll disappear again. Maybe forever. Maya pinned her father's scout sniper badge to her flight suit, right over her heart. Then we don't waste time. What do you need from me? Morrison stepped forward. A shooter. The best we have. He met her eyes. Your father started this hunt, Maya. I think it's only right that you finish it. Maya nodded, feeling the weight and rightness of the moment settling into her bones. For her father, for Morrison's team, for all the people whose lives have been shattered by this one man's violence, for the child her father had refused to kill, and the principle he died defending. When do we move? She asked. Morrison's smile was fierce and approving. As soon as you're ready, Captain. As soon as you're ready. The mission briefing was terse and focused. The Taliban commander, identified as Khalid Wardak, had established a temporary command post in a mountain compound 18 kilometers from forward operating base Chapman. Intelligence indicated he would be there for no more than 8 hours before moving again. The window of opportunity was razor thin. Maya studied the satellite imagery with Morrison, Ramirez, and Gunny Kowalski. The compound sat in a natural bowl surrounded by rocky ridges, similar to the hostage rescue site, but with more complex terrain. The shooting position would be at extreme range, over 3,000 yards, with significant elevation changes and unpredictable mountain winds. Kowalski traced the approach route with his finger. We'll insert here on the southern ridge. 2 teams. Morrison SEALs will position for direct action if needed. My Marines will provide security and spotting for Captain Chun. He looked at Maya. This is going to be the hardest shot of your life, ma'am. Harder than anything your father ever attempted. Maya felt the weight of her father's badge against her chest. I understand, Gunny, but it needs to be done. Morrison leaned forward, his expression intense. Rules of engagement are clear. We have positive identification on Wardak. He's designated a high-value target with kill authorization. But if there are civilians in the compound, we abort. No exceptions. Maya met his eyes, understanding the unspoken message. Just like her father had faced 8 years ago. The same impossible choice between tactical advantage and moral principle. I understand completely, Lieutenant Commander. The helicopter insertion was smooth, dropping both teams onto the ridgeline under cover of darkness. Maya moved with the Marines, Kowalski leading them to the prepared shooting position with practiced efficiency. The night vision equipment painted the world in shades of green, the compound below a collection of structures barely visible in the distance. Maya set up her rifle with meticulous care, each adjustment precise and deliberate. This wasn't her weapon, wasn't the familiar A-10 she'd flown for years. This was her father's domain, the world of precision shooting where patience and calculation meant everything. Beside her, Kowalski set up the spotting scope, his movements economical and professional. Range is 3,140 yards, Kowalski called softly. Elevation difference is 420 feet. Wind is variable, gusting 8 to 14 miles per hour from the northwest. Temperature 40 degrees at our position, probably 55 in the valley. Maya began her calculations, factoring in every variable she could measure and several she would have to trust to instinct and experience. Through her scope, she could see the compound stirring to life as dawn approached. Figures moving between buildings, guards on the rooftops, and in the central structure, according to intelligence, Khalid Wardak planning his next attack. Morrison's voice came through her earpiece. Chun, we have visual confirmation. Wardak just exited the main building. He's in the courtyard with 4 other individuals. No sign of civilians. Maya shifted her aim, finding the courtyard through her scope. Even at this range with maximum magnification, the figures were small, details difficult to discern. She watched, waiting for the moment when she could positively identify the target. Her breathing slowed, entering the zone her father had taught her, with a world narrowed to crosshairs and wind and the inevitable mathematics of ballistics. Target identified. Morrison confirmed. Wardak is wearing the white turban, speaking with the group near the vehicle. You have a shot when ready. Maya's finger rested on the trigger, but she didn't increase pressure. The wind was gusting hard, the mirage dancing wildly across the valley. She could force the shot, accept the increased risk, potentially end this now. But her father's voice echoed in her memory. The hardest shots are the ones you choose not to take. And sometimes the hardest choice was waiting when everyone wanted you to shoot. Wind's too variable, she reported calmly. I needed to settle, or the bullet drifts unpredictably. She could feel the tension radiating from the team around her. Every second they waited increased the chance of discovery, of Wardak moving inside, of losing this opportunity. But Maya forced herself to trust her training, to trust the lessons her father had died defending. Kowalski's voice was steady beside her. Wind's starting to drop. 11 miles per hour, decreasing. Mirage is settling. Maya watched through the scope, seeing the patterns emerge from chaos. The wind was finding a rhythm, the gusts less frequent. Wardak was still in the courtyard, gesturing emphatically to his subordinates. She made her final calculations, adjusted her aim point to account for the bullet's 3.5-second flight time. Then she saw it. A child, maybe 7 years old, running from one building toward the courtyard, playing, oblivious to the danger, moving directly toward Wardak's position. Chun, Morrison's voice carried sudden urgency. "We have a child entering the area. Do you see it?" Maya's breath froze in her chest. Through the scope, she watched the child run closer to Wardak, who turned and smiled, reaching down to ruffle the boy's hair. A grandson maybe, or nephew. Someone innocent caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts. This was it, the moment her father had faced, the impossible choice that had defined his final hours. She could wait, hope the child moved away. But Wardak might leave, might disappear for another 8 years, planning more attacks, killing more soldiers, destroying more lives. The tactical calculus was brutal and clear. Her finger trembled on the trigger. Sweat ran down her face despite the mountain cold. Every instinct screamed at her to wait, but tactical reality demanded action. Morrison's team was exposed on this ridge. Dawn was coming. The longer they stayed, the greater the risk to everyone. Maya, Kowalski's voice was gentle, understanding. "Your call, ma'am. No judgment either way." Maya thought about her father's letter, about choosing targets wisely, about never losing humanity for tactical advantage. She thought about Morrison's team, risking their lives to be here, about the soldiers at Chapman who had fought and bled last night, about the hostages she'd saved with an impossible shot. But she also thought about the child in the courtyard, playing in the early morning light, unaware that a bullet was being calculated for his vicinity. She thought about the choice her father had made, the principle he'd died defending. She lifted her finger from the trigger. "Abort," she said quietly. "Child is too close to target. Risk of civilian casualty is unacceptable." Morrison's response came immediately. "Confirmed. Stand by for reassessment." Through the scope, Maya watched Wardak finish his conversation and head back toward the main building. The child ran off to play elsewhere. The opportunity passed like smoke in wind. Around her, she could feel the team's disappointment, could imagine the questions they weren't asking. Why didn't she take the shot? Why did she let Wardak escape? But Kowalski's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. "Good call, ma'am. Same one your father would have made." The words settled into Maya's chest, bringing a peace she hadn't expected. She'd made the right choice. The hard choice. The choice that honored her father's memory not by completing his mission, but by upholding his principles. Then Morrison's voice crackled with sudden intensity. "Wait. Wardak is coming back out. He's alone. Child is gone. If you have the shot, take it now." Maya swung her scope back to the courtyard. Wardak stood alone, looking toward the mountains as if he could sense the danger. The wind had settled to a steady 9 miles per hour. The range was extreme, but manageable. No civilians in sight. No moral calculus to navigate. Just a clean shot at a legitimate military target. This was different from her father's moment. This was the shot after the right choice had been made. The shot that came from patience and principle rather than pressure and expedience. Maya's breathing steadied. Her finger returned to the trigger. She calculated the final adjustments, reading the mirage like a language only shooters understood. Wardak turned slightly, presenting a perfect profile. "Shot is good," Maya announced. "Wind is steady. Range confirmed." Taking the shot, the rifle barked, the recoil familiar and almost comforting. Through the scope, Maya tracked the bullet's impact point, 3.5 seconds of perfect physics. Wardak dropped, the shot precise and final. No suffering, no collateral damage. Just justice delivered across 3,140 yards of Afghan mountain air. "Confirmed kill," Morrison called. "Target is down. Excellent shot, Chun. Truly excellent." The team around her erupted in quiet celebration, professional and controlled but genuine. Kowalski pulled her into a brief embrace, his voice rough. "Your father is smiling right now, Captain. That was his daughter through and through. Patient, principled, and absolutely deadly when the moment was right." Maya felt tears streaming down her face, but they were different from the ones she'd shed before. Not grief or guilt or rage. Just release. The weight of 8 years lifting. The ghost of her father's supposed failure finally laid to rest by the truth of his actual heroism. Morrison appeared beside her, having moved from his position. He extended his hand, his expression showing complete respect. That was the finest piece of shooting I've ever witnessed. Not just technically, but morally. You had every tactical reason to take that shot when the child was near. You chose not to. Then you made the shot when it was right. That's what real courage looks like. Maya shook his hand firmly. I learned from the best, Lieutenant Commander. Both what to do and what not to do. As the team prepared for extraction, Maya looked toward the compound where Khalid Wardak's 8-year campaign of violence had finally ended. Her father had started this hunt with a choice that cost him his life. She had finished it with a choice that honored his memory. The helicopter ride back to Chapman was quiet, each team member lost in their own thoughts. Maya sat with her father's badge pressed against her heart, feeling closer to him than she had in 8 years. She finally understood what he'd been trying to teach her all along. That being a warrior wasn't about never missing, never hesitating, never doubting. It was about making hard choices with eyes wide open and living with the consequences. She made a shot her father would have been proud of. Not because it was difficult, though it was, but because she made it for the right reasons, in the right way at the right time. As Chapman came into view, Maya whispered one final message to her father. Mission complete, Dad. I did it your way. The week following Wardak's elimination brought a strange peace to Forward Operating Base Chapman. Taliban activity in the region dropped dramatically. The enemy forces scattered and demoralized by the loss of their commander and the failed assault on the base. For the first time in months, soldiers could move through the compound without the constant tension of imminent attack. Maya spent her days helping repair her destroyed A-10, even though everyone knew the aircraft would never fly again. It would be stripped for parts, its broken body cannibalized to keep other aircraft operational. But she felt she owed the machine something, this titanium beast that had carried her through impossible situations and somehow brought her home. Commander Rourke found her on the 4th day, elbow deep in hydraulic systems that would never pressurize again. Captain Shun, my office when you have a moment. Maya cleaned her hands and followed him to the command building. Inside, she found not just Rourke, but Morrison, Kowalski, and a Marine colonel she didn't recognize. The colonel's name tape read Patterson, and the ribbons on his chest told a story of multiple combat deployments and significant command experience. Rourke gestured for Maya to sit. Captain, this is Colonel Patterson from Marine Forces Central Command. He's here regarding your father. Patterson leaned forward, his weathered face kind but serious. Captain Shun, I've spent the last week reviewing the classified file on your father's final mission. I've also reviewed Lieutenant Commander Morrison's testimony, Gunnery Sergeant Kowalski's statement, and Commander Rourke's recommendation. He paused. Your father was posthumously recommended for the Navy Cross 8 years ago. That recommendation was buried by officers who were no longer in positions of authority. Maya's heart hammered in her chest. Sir, I was told the recommendation was withdrawn. It wasn't withdrawn, Captain. It was suppressed. Patterson's voice carried quiet anger. By people more concerned with avoiding scrutiny than honoring a hero. But circumstances have changed. Those officers have retired. And new leadership has different priorities. He pulled a document from his briefcase. I'm here to inform you that Sergeant Major David Chin's Navy Cross recommendation has been approved. The award ceremony will take place in 2 weeks at Camp Pendleton. Maya couldn't speak. Tears blurred her vision as the weight of 8 years finally, completely lifted. Patterson continued, his voice gentle. Your mother will be presented with the medal your father earned. The citation will reflect the truth. That he refused an unlawful order. That he led the assault that saved Morrison's SEAL team and his own Marines. That he died protecting others with full knowledge of the cost. He paused. Your father's name will be remembered correctly. As a hero who valued principle over tactical advantage. Morrison spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. I've also submitted a formal statement taking responsibility for my role in allowing the false narrative to persist. I should have fought harder for the truth 8 years ago. I'm sorry it took this long. Maya shook her head, finding her voice. You were dealing with your own trauma, Lieutenant Commander. You don't owe me an apology. You gave me the truth when it mattered most. Kowalski cleared his throat, drawing attention. Ma'am, there's more. The Marine Scout Sniper community is establishing an annual award in your father's name. The David Chin Award for Ethical Marksmanship. It will recognize shooters who demonstrate not just technical skill, but moral courage in their decision-making. Maya's hand went to her father's badge, still pinned over her heart. She thought about the child in the courtyard, about the choice she'd made, about the shot that came after. He would have loved that, Gunny. Thank you. Rourke stood, moving to his desk. And finally, Captain, there's the matter of your own actions. The Distinguished Flying Cross for your performance during the base assault has been approved. Additionally, you're being recommended for the Silver Star for the Wardak mission. He pulled out another folder. But there's also this. He handed Maya a set of orders. She scanned them quickly, her eyes widening. A transfer to the Joint Air-Ground Integration Program at Nellis Air Force Base. A position teaching pilots and ground forces how to coordinate more effectively. A role that would let her bridge the gap between her two worlds. Morrison grinned, the expression transforming his usually serious face. I may have made some calls. Put in a good word. The program needs someone who understands both perspectives. Someone who can fly and shoot. Someone who knows when to do both and when to do neither. Maya looked around the room at these men who had become more than colleagues. Morrison, who had moved from antagonist to ally to friend. Kowalski, who had carried her father's badge for 8 years waiting to complete his mission. Rourke, who had supported her even when the choices were hard. Patterson, who had fought to give her father the recognition he deserved. I don't know what to say, she managed. Say you'll accept, Patterson replied. Say you'll take this gift we're offering and use it to train the next generation. Teach them what your father taught you. That technical skill without moral foundation is just violence. That real strength means knowing when not to use your power. Maya nodded, unable to trust her voice. Patterson stood, extending his hand. Your father would be exceptionally proud, Captain. Not just of your shooting, though that 3,000-yard shot on Wardak is already becoming legend, but of who you are, the choices you make, the principles you uphold. After the meeting, Maya walked to the memorial wall one final time. Her father's name was still there, etched in black granite. But now when she looked at it, she didn't see failure or missed shots or guilt. She saw a hero who had made the hardest choice and paid for it with his life. A man who had valued a child's life more than tactical advantage. A Marine who had taught his daughter that real courage meant knowing when not to pull the trigger. Morrison found her there, standing in companionable silence for a long moment before speaking. I've been thinking about something your father told me once. During that training exercise where we first met, he said the job of a warrior isn't to love fighting. It's to be good enough at fighting that we can protect people who can't protect themselves. Maya smiled through her tears. That sounds like him. Morrison continued, his voice thoughtful. I spent 8 years thinking he failed because he hesitated. But he didn't hesitate at all. He made a choice instantaneously. The choice to value life, even when it cost him tactically. Then he backed up that choice with action, going into that building knowing it might kill him. He paused. That's not hesitation. That's clarity. They stood together as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the Afghan sky in shades of orange and purple. Maya thought about the journey that had brought her here. From 16-year-old girl losing her father to 24-year-old woman finally understanding his legacy. From pilot afraid of becoming a shooter to someone who could be both when needed. Sam Okoye appeared, his familiar grin splitting his dark face. Heard you're heading to Nellis. Going to miss having you in the squadron, Chun. But I can't think of anyone better to teach the next generation how to do this right. Maya hugged him, grateful for his friendship through all of this. You'll have to come visit. I'll need someone to keep me honest. Chief Ramirez joined them, his weathered face showing genuine warmth. Ma'am, it's been an honor serving with you. Your father would be proud. Hell, we're all proud. The group grew as word spread that Maya was leaving. SEALs and Marines, pilots and support staff, all coming to say goodbye to the quiet captain who had proven that courage came in many forms. That strength meant making hard choices. That honor was about more than hitting targets. As darkness fell over Chapman, Maya stood surrounded by warriors who had become family. She touched her father's badge one final time, feeling the weight of his legacy settling into something she could carry not as a burden, but as a gift. Kowalski approached last, pressing something into her hand. Your father gave me two things before that final mission, ma'am. The badge I returned to you, and this. He opened her hand to reveal a simple compass, military issue, but worn smooth with use. He said if he didn't make it back, I should give this to you when you were ready to find your own direction. Maya closed her fingers around the compass, feeling its solid weight. I think I'm ready now, Gunny. Kowalski's smile was warm. I know you are, ma'am. Your father knew it too. That's why he wasn't worried. He knew you'd find your way eventually. That night, Maya packed her belongings in preparation for the flight to Bagram and then home. She carefully placed her father's badge and compass in her personal effects, artifacts of a legacy she finally understood. She wrote a long letter to her mother, explaining everything that had happened, the truth about her father's death, the award he would finally receive. As she sealed the envelope, she felt a peace she hadn't known in 8 years. Her father hadn't failed. She hadn't failed. They had both made the choices they could live with, the choices that honored who they were rather than what others expected them to be. Tomorrow, she would begin the journey home, to her mother, to the ceremony where her father would finally receive the recognition he deserved, to a new mission teaching others what she had learned through pain and revelation and impossible shots taken and not taken. But tonight, she sat in the darkness of her small room, holding her father's compass, finally pointed in a direction she understood. Forward, always forward, carrying his memory not as weight, but as wings. 2 weeks later, Maya stood in dress uniform at Camp Pendleton, California, watching the Pacific Ocean roll against the shore beyond the ceremony grounds. The sky was impossibly blue, the kind of perfect California day that seemed designed for important moments. Around her, hundreds of Marines and their families gathered for the award ceremony that would finally tell the truth about Sergeant Major David Chun. Her mother stood beside her, smaller than Maya remembered, her hair now streaked with gray. But her eyes were bright and clear as she squeezed Maya's hand. Your father would be so proud of you, sweetheart, not just for completing his mission, but for understanding why he made the choices he did. Maya returned the squeeze, her throat tight with emotion. Mom. I wasted so many years thinking he failed. Her mother shook her head gently. You weren't wasting time, Maya. You were becoming who you needed to be. Your father knew that journey would take time. That's why he left you the compass and the letter. He understood you'd find your way when you were ready. The ceremony began with the traditional military precision Maya had grown up around. Marines in dress blues standing at attention. Colors presented. The national anthem played by a brass ensemble. But when Colonel Patterson took the podium, the ceremony shifted into something more personal, more profound. Patterson's voice carried across the assembled crowd, strong and clear. We are gathered today to correct an injustice 8 years in the making, to finally honor a Marine who made the hardest choice a warrior can make and paid for it with his life. Sergeant Major David Chun was more than an exceptional shooter, though his skills were legendary. He was a man of unshakable principle who valued human life, even when it cost him tactically, professionally, and ultimately, personally. Patterson detailed the Helmand Province mission with brutal honesty. The order to shoot through a civilian child. David Chen's refusal. The decision to disobey direct orders rather than risk killing an innocent. The assault he led to complete the mission his way, saving Morrison's SEAL team and his own Marines. His death while providing covering fire for the withdrawal. Maya watched her mother's face as the truth was finally, publicly told. Saw the tears streaming down her cheeks. Saw the pride and grief and validation of everything she had known in her heart about the man she loved. Around them, Marines stood at attention, many with their own tears falling as they heard the story of one of their finest making the choice that defined true courage. Morrison was there, standing with his SEAL team in their dress uniforms. Ramirez beside him. Kowalski with his scout sniper unit. Sam Okoye representing her Air Force squadron, all of them bearing witness to this moment. Patterson called Maya's mother forward. Mrs. Chun, on behalf of the President of the United States, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and a grateful nation, it is my honor to present you with the Navy Cross awarded to your husband, Sergeant Major David Chun, for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. The medal was placed in her mother's hands, the Navy Cross gleaming in the California sun. The citation was read aloud, every word a repudiation of the lies that had been told, every phrase a testament to the truth that had finally emerged. When it was complete, the assembled Marines rendered a salute that seemed to stretch into eternity. Maya stood beside her mother, saluting her father's memory, tears streaming down her face. Around them, hundreds of hands raised in synchronized tribute to a man who had proven that the measure of a warrior wasn't just in the targets hit, but in the principles upheld. After the ceremony, Morrison approached Maya and her mother. His face showed the marks of his own emotional journey. Mrs. Chun, I owe you an apology 8 years overdue. I let the wrong story persist because confronting the truth meant confronting my own survival and what it cost. I am deeply sorry. Maya's mother embraced him, this man who had been there when her husband died. You saved yourself by finally telling the truth, Commander. David would forgive you. I forgive you. Now you need to forgive yourself. Morrison's composure cracked, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Maya's mother held him, this warrior who had carried guilt for so long, offering the absolution he needed. When he finally stepped back, his eyes found Maya. Your father told me something in that building, right before he was hit. He said, take care of my Marines. Take care of my family. Tell them I did it right. Maya's breath caught. Those were his last words. Morrison nodded. I've carried them for 8 years, wondering how to fulfill that promise. He looked between Maya and her mother. I think finally I have. The reception that followed brought together people from every phase of David Chen's career. Marines he had trained, snipers he had mentored, officers he had served under, each with their own story of his skill, his patience, his unwavering commitment to doing things right even when right was hard. Kowalski introduced Maya to a young Marine corporal, barely 20 years old. Ma'am, this is Corporal Sarah Martinez. She's the first recipient of the David Chen Award for ethical marksmanship. During a deployment to Syria, she held fire when a shot would have been tactically advantageous but morally questionable. Saved civilian lives. Chose principle over expedience. Maya shook Martinez's hand, seeing in her eyes the same struggle she had faced on that ridge overlooking Wardak's compound. You made the right choice, Corporal. Martinez's voice was quiet but firm. I made the choice your father taught all of us to make, ma'am. The one that lets you sleep at night. As the sun began to set over the Pacific, Maya found herself alone at the edge of the grounds, looking out at the ocean. Her father had loved this view, had brought her here as a child to watch the waves and talk about life and service and what it meant to be a warrior. Her mother joined her, slipping an arm around Maya's waist. He's at peace now. Finally, the truth is told. His legacy is secure. Maya leaned into her mother's embrace. I spent so long thinking I had to be him, Mom. Had to shoot like him, serve like him, make the same choices he made. But that's not what he wanted, was it? Her mother smiled, the expression bittersweet but genuine. He wanted you to be yourself, sweetheart. To take what he taught you and make it your own. To find your own way of serving, your own balance between strength and mercy. She paused. I think you've done that beautifully. They stood together as the sky painted itself in shades of orange and pink, the day giving way to evening. Maya thought about the journey that had brought her here, the impossible shots taken and refused, the choices made in darkness and light, the understanding that had come through pain and revelation. Morrison approached one final time, his expression peaceful in a way Maya had never seen. I'm putting in for the instructor position at the program where you'll be teaching. If they'll have me. He smiled slightly. Figure someone needs to make sure you don't go easy on the ground pounders. Maya laughed, the sound genuine and free. They'll definitely have you, Lieutenant Commander. We're going to need your perspective to make this work. As darkness fell over Camp Pendleton, The ceremony grounds emptied slowly. Maya stood with her mother, Morrison, Kowalski, and a small group of people who had become family through shared understanding of sacrifice and service. They told stories about David Chun, each memory adding dimension to the man who had been more than his final mission, more than one impossible choice. Late that night, Maya sat in her hotel room holding her father's compass and scout sniper badge. Tomorrow, she would begin the drive to Nellis Air Force Base and her new assignment, a chance to teach what she had learned, to help others navigate the impossible choices that came with carrying weapons and wearing uniforms and standing between civilization and chaos. She opened her father's letter one more time, reading the words that had sustained her through the hardest moments. Being a good shooter isn't about hitting every target. It's about choosing your targets wisely. It's about having the courage to hold fire when pulling the trigger would be easier but wrong. Maya pulled out a piece of hotel stationery and began to write. Not to her father this time, but to the future students she would teach. The young pilots and ground forces who would learn to work together, to trust each other, to make hard choices with eyes wide open. She wrote about technical skills and tactical coordination, but mostly she wrote about principle and courage and the understanding that real strength meant knowing your limits and exceeding them only when others needed you to. That being a warrior meant never losing sight of why you fought in the first place. As she finished writing, Maya realized she was finally at peace. Not because all the questions were answered or all the wounds healed, but because she understood now what her father had always known, that the journey mattered more than the destination. That courage came in many forms. That honor was about more than hitting targets. She looked at the compass one final time before setting it on the nightstand. Tomorrow she would follow its direction toward a new mission, a new purpose. But tonight, she simply sat in the quiet darkness, feeling her father's presence not as a ghost or burden or impossible standard, but as a gentle guidance toward becoming who she was always meant to be. A warrior, a teacher, a daughter who finally understood her father's greatest lesson. That the most important shots in life aren't the ones you take, but the ones you refuse, and the courage it takes to live with both. If this story moved you, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or character. Maybe you know someone who found peace after carrying guilt, or witnessed unlikely friendships form through shared service. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The end.